All right, and welcome to Two Therapists and a Microphone. I am Dr. Harrison Davis.
And I'm Dr. Aisha Dickerson.
Two Therapists and a Microphone is a show about mental health, relationships, and social issues that personally affect you. We broadcast live every Thursday evening at 7:30 p.m.
So, Harrison and I are two licensed psychotherapists with decades of clinical experience, and we want to hear from you. We want to hear about situations or dilemmas that you're going through or have been through. There's nothing too small, nothing too big. We're sure you have something important to say. So, you can comment in our comment section or you can send questions beforehand, but we'll tell you how to do that later.
Absolutely. So why not ask some experts as opposed to people who used to wait tables or serve as physical therapists? That's what I've seen on other networks. But
I
today
hear
we
call themselves coaches because they went through something,
yeah, they
a
went through
couple
something.
of
Now they're a
times.
life coach because they were in the military for 20 years.
Yeah.
But today we're going to talk about something that's happening currently in the sports world on an international level. We're going to talk about racial bias and racism within sports and athletics, particularly within the International Olympic Committee. And Aisha wants to tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I do. So, I promised Harrison I wouldn't cuss and I wouldn't get too gangster tonight. But we've talked a little bit about sports in the past, and I think we touched on this. Maybe was a few years ago. Talked about high school sports and racism and stuff there. But in the media, we've seen it more in looking at the NFL with Tony Dungy's letter, and just recently this week we've been seeing what I consider, and I think most other people would consider to be racism at the Olympics. We have this figure skater whose name I don't even know because I mean, like, I don't watch the
That
winter Olympics.
Russian gal.
Yeah, yeah. All I know is, she's white and she tested positive for something that is performance enhancing. Anyway, I'm not going to go, I'm going to wait to go into that so we can hear from our experts when I tell the full story as I understand it, because I also have discovered that maybe I didn't know all the details. So let's start by introducing our speakers. The first person that I'm going to introduce is Zahara Williams. Ms. Williams is a licensed clinical social worker, strategist, trainer, and owner of Z Rain Solutions, a consulting agency. She is also co owner of Ivory Park, a boutique telehealth practice based in Dallas, Texas. An 18-year career in the field of mental health has allowed Zahara to gain a wealth of knowledge and skills with specialties in trauma, relationships, and grief. As an agent and clinician, her mission is to bridge clinical knowledge and her passion for teaching. Zahara has been able to achieve this in her capacity as an adjunct clinical supervisor, CEU provider, and conference speaker. Zahara strives to engage audiences in thought provoking exploration in their journey towards transformation and cultivating transparency. Welcome, Miss Williams. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I want to introduce our next guest, Dr. Antoine Player. I might call you Dr. Throughout the show. But Dr. Antoine Player is an associate professor at Adler Graduate School located in Minnetonka, Minnesota. Antoine holds two licenses, one in Minnesota as a licensed professional clinical counselor and another in Florida as a licensed mental health counselor. Antoine currently is the ethics co-chair for the Minnesota Counseling Association and is a member of various organizations. Antoine's clinical philosophy focuses on helping individuals reach self-actualization and has worked with several different populations, including high-risk adolescents, parenting enhancement, and individuals of the LGBT community. Welcome to the show, Dr. Player.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so today we're going to talk about what Aisha was talking about earlier, and I was catching up on the news earlier today because, as I mentioned in an earlier episode, I stopped watching news. January the
Yeah,
6th,
me too, a long time ago. I got some text message.
2021 was the day I made a conscious decision. However, I am hearing some news about a situation with the Olympics, the Winter Olympics, and a Russian ice skater who happens to be a teenage girl, 15 years old, and it was discovered through lab testing that she had one of the banned substances, in her system. Yet the Olympic Committee decided to allow her to continue competing within the Olympics. Now, this is fresh off the heels, during the Summer Olympics, when the track star Shakara, I hope I'm pronouncing her name.
Shakari.
Shakari, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And a sister. And there were lots of hopes for her bringing home a gold. She came up, tested positive for marijuana, and they did more than scorn her, to scold her. You know, they prevented her from competing against her competitors, and that made national news here in the U.S., of course. So today there seems to be a discrepancy, you know, with some of the policies that are out there, and the whole world's watching, especially the black folks in the United States.
Okay, because Shakari was going to win, so we thought, but it's like her getting put out of the Olympics set her back so far. Like the next time we saw her race again, she came in absolute last, like 9th place in that race, and I felt bad for her because you know, imagine being at the top and then having to watch everybody else. And now, granted, she was talking a whole bunch of crap on Twitter every day.
She was
about what she would have done, and then she came back and she did horribly. So I always imagined if she had been allowed to continue to play at that level, how much better would she have been? No one thought about how it was going to ruin her career, how physically she might not be up to par after not running in such, you know, a competitive level. No one really thought about her feelings when they put her out there, like, oh, we're sorry, whatever. But when it came to this Russian skater, okay, so the 15 minutes that I watched the news, they were saying something about that it would be detrimental to her. What was it?
She's part of a protected group because she's a minor.
Right. Yeah. But still, well, Shakari is, I don't know how old she is.
She's a college student.
Right. So still, like, her prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed. So, you know, I'd venture to say they're somewhere around the same mentally, despite the fact that Shakari is older, but nobody thought about that. And the girl's not the Russian girl, but Shakari's mama just died. Like, there's just a lot of things go. I don't want to go on and on because we have 2 other people here to talk. So I want to ask, starting with you, Ms. Williams, what are your initial thoughts when you see that or hear about what's going on with the Russian girl? Does it even appear like racism to you, or is this just, you know, black people pulling the race car when it has nothing to do with race?
So it's interesting, right? Because the initial perception when you see that is, we just had less than a year ago an incident where there was a young Black lady, as you all have spoken about, who is experiencing some emotional distress and attempting to cope and then still rise to the occasion, right? And there was very little to no empathy provided for her. And so now we are in a situation where a young Russian young lady who is taking a drug, because I was reading some articles about it. It's interesting because they said, well, it's used for chest pain, but it's also, right? So they make sure they put that caveat on there that there is a medical condition that it could be used for. And so at the initial looking, of course, we don't know all the background. We can just assume it does seem to be some preferential treatment, a little more empathy, which is typical, right? When we talk about just even in the Black community, how drugs and how we are demonized and incarcerated for things that are done, but yet other, when we look at opioid use and other things, oh, let's put them in a treatment facility.
Oh, yeah, I didn't even think about that.
You're right. I'm seeing a little similarities here. So it definitely gives that perception, which is disheartening for sure.
And so, Dr. Player, when you see this and you see this young white girl, what are your? Well, that's what she. I mean, she is
Russian ice skater,
but she is 100% Anglo.
That's
right?
Correct.
Okay, not mixed with anything. You know, she didn't come. Her people weren't in America.
That's right. The white girl. Okay.
Right. Okay. that was fewer syllables. So, Dr. Player, I know you work with quite a few Caucasian women yourself, based on what I know about about where you work in your career. What are your initial thoughts?
You know, after this event occurred, you know, it makes you think about how society has viewed Black individuals, especially Black individuals that are athletes. And the unfortunate part during this time period is the fact that you have this young woman who tested positive for marijuana, but was also going through a grieving period as well, still rose to the occasion, still performed. You have this person coming over all these milestones, and then they get knocked off their pedestal. They're almost saying, like, you're not good enough. Whereas this young ice skater, I'm not sure what sport she performed.
We'll say ice skater, yeah, the young ice skater.
Young ice skater, now we have this incident, and then there's a rationale as to, okay, this is why this is okay. And that same mindset wasn't taken with the same African American athlete, which is how we've been treated throughout society, which is we're expected to perform on a different level and not have the same empathy as other individuals. So to me, it's almost frustrating to see this occur, and she still was villainized after the fact. Like you said, she came in last place, and people still talk negatively about her. Whereas this Russian ice skater, we're carrying on like it's Wednesday. Nothing happened, nothing occurred. Let's just move on with our day. It's giving her the benefit of doubt, but not giving the benefit of doubt to anyone else, and that's unfair.
Gotcha. And to add to all of this, today's updates, as I was
Yes,
doing my
please give me the
research,
updates because I don't watch
the
news.
Russian 15-year-old girl performed, and she fell on ice, and she started crying, and eventually came in fourth place.
But did she cry during her performance?
It was afterwards.
Okay.
And so I noticed it because I saw the feed on social media and how a lot of people are running to her rescue now. And it feels sorry for her, and that she was under a lot of pressure for a 15-year-old girl. Granted, that's so, but I remember our athlete, Shakari, is that her name?
Yes.
And so she was going through a lot, and she could have used some of that sympathy that is out there. But what I want to ask you guys, Zahara, we can start with you. What does that say about how the international community views Black individuals? We're talking about athletes here, but compared to the white individuals and sort of expectations, are some of the Black athletes being villainized?
I think it starts at home, right? And so if we're talking about, if we just use America as an example, how do we treat our athletes? How do we treat those of color? And so when that is kind of the systematic way that we see people, when we see them as being less than, or we see them as it's just not a lot of not a lot of empathy for our athletes, as we talked about before. And so I think that's just spread across. So not necessarily any particular segment that seems to have more grace or understanding or empathy for our athletes. It is, if you're going through something, kind of suck it up, right? Keep going, keep pressing forward. This is nothing. You should have known better. So there's like the expectation that you should know better, and then the expectation for you to also to perform regardless of what your human experience is. So let's disregard that and say that regardless of what's happening with you, this is what we need you to show up as. And if you don't, then I think he used the word villainize, right? If you don't, then you're villainized because you're selfish. You didn't. I think we can even go back to Simone Biles when she took a mental health break, right? I can't even think of the young tennis player's name, but when she also took a break and said,
Naomi, I think.
Naomi, yes, absolutely, absolutely. So even when they take a break and they don't even have drugs, then there's still a negative connotation that's attached to them, which is so unfortunate.
Yeah, I remember people attacked all of them, for those decisions because they didn't bring home that gold or win that championship, or even believing they should have been tougher, like you said, But Dr. Player, how are the Black athletes supposed to prepare, for a competition when there's this extra added external pressure put on them to do something that is not expected of most of the white athletes?
That's a very difficult question to answer because it's one of those where how do we know what an athlete is supposed to go through when they're dealing with their own personal life, but yet expected to perform? And it's one of those where we think of athletes as supposed to be invincible to everyday struggles or everyday issues, where they're supposed to be immune to not experiencing any mental health concerns. when in fact we see this time after time where athletes are experiencing mental health concerns, but expected to perform, and when they underperform, they still get criticized for it. So how does one really prepare for the criticism that society brings to them during a time period like this? And really the question we need to ask is, how can society start treating these athletes like human beings and not putting these expectations on them as if they don't have struggles like anyone else, and really start appreciating them for who they are and knowing that they're performing at a high caliber, and that takes a lot of a human being.
I'm 100% agree with you. I mean, it's hard enough for me to get up the stairs today. So I know that I mean, they are physically doing a lot, but then we
Yeah.
have even heard from owners and stuff say, like, let's think back when Colin Kaepernick, had started kneeling, that you just play the game. Just play. You don't have a mind. You don't need to be political. No one cares about your mental health. Don't worry about how people
Forget
are treating
about your
you.
personal
Right.
values.
We pay
Absolutely.
you. Just go beat your body up and shut up. And I mean, that's a lot for anyone, but I imagine, even if I got paid well for it, it's even more for them who put their body through 1,000 times more than I do, and probably experience not necessarily the same type of racism that we do. But I'm thinking about Tony Dungy's letter that I saw on the internet to the NFL, where he talks about not uh not being able to play quarterback, and not getting drafted, and then not being chosen as a head coach. And how old is he now? I really should have googled all of these ages, but he's just now, and unless he's been talking about it before, coming out and talking about this at his age. No, and if they don't care about their mental health today, I know they didn't care about it back then.
He's 66.
Thank you, thank you. So, I mean, Tony went through a lot. Colin Kaepernick didn't even have a job anymore. Did you all watch his Netflix special?
Mm-hmm.
It was good. I mean, some of it was good. Most of it was good. Let's say that. So, what do you think that society can do? I mean, because I guess we simply make them money by watching it on TV. What can we do to support the mental health of our Black athletes? Let's start with you, Dr. Player.
What can we do to support our athletes' mental health? Well,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to quote Dave Chappelle because I think he's a fascinating person.
Watch out now.
Well,
don't get us in trouble.
He did a roundtable talk, and he talked about the term crazy, and he said that in today's society we use that term very loosely. We use that when we don't understand someone. So when someone's going through a difficulty, we say that person's crazy, and therefore we chop it up to that and we just walk away. The reality of it is no one's crazy. Everybody's a strong individual. The reality of it is, what is society putting them through that's causing them to respond in that manner? So when it comes down to society, what can society do is really just acknowledge that everybody experiences their own difficulties, and knowing that what we're doing can negatively impact another individual. So yes, an athlete could have a bad night. That doesn't give a human being the right to harass them on social media or call them names or attack their families, or a case in LeBron, because he left one team and went to another team. They decide to spray paint, a racial slur on his home. These are human beings that are going through human difficulties, and because you don't like what they do on the court or on the field, doesn't give you the right to harass them. So what can we do as a society is understand that these are human beings and not treat them with any disrespect whatsoever, despite what they may do on and off in the field.
I like that. So what I want to ask you, Zahara, where are the priorities for society, to follow up on Dr. Dickerson's question, in regards to athletes and sports? Because it sounds like there's a lot of pressure to perform, bring home the medal or the championship, and perhaps because they're Black, that's all you need to do. You don't need to have any feelings or emotions. But what does that say about the priorities of our society?
Yeah, I think that speaks to this need for gratification and selfishness. for lack of a better way to put it, what makes me feel good, what makes me happy, regardless of what impact it might have on someone else. And so, just to kind of add to the question, or the answer, part of it, because I'm such a systems person, right? And so when we think about where this all stems from and how we can be kind of really integral in making some changes, is it starts early on, right? Because we can say, yes, we need to be empathetic, we need to not bully, but we really, I firmly believe that we need to talk about and normalize feelings and emotions like in middle school. Like we need to start way back, right? Just as much as we talk about having math and science and all those things, the real things that we deal with in life is how do you navigate emotions and relationships. And I think that when people have an understanding of that, and they're not bullied for having a human experience, and they're not pressured, because then they honor that individual's limitations, whatever they may be in that moment, then I think society will be in a much better place. But because they don't know, the ignorance of it all, then we just go with, well, forget how you feel, forget your experience. What is it that makes me feel good? What makes me feel good is for my team to win. What makes me feel good is that the USA, because I am so patriotic, has won the goal, regardless of what that individual or that team is dealing with. And I think that is a huge part of the problem.
I agree with that. I even remember when the stuff went down with the NFL and people were like, boycott the NFL. I'm pretty sure the NFL lost $0 during that time. Like, did anyone actually follow through with not watching games? Everybody still bought their tickets. Everybody still watched it on TV. By everybody, I don't mean me, because I didn't even realize the Super Bowl was on last Sunday. But my point is that, we come up with these grand ideas for how to make things better, and then it seems like we just don't have a whole lot of follow through.
And those things are so temporary too. I'm sorry, just to
right.
add
No,
to
no, no.
that,
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. Like when you say temporary, about how long on average do you think it will last?
Our attention span is so short, right? So it's like maybe a week, a month max, right? Where we do something and we're really about the cause, and then normalcy, right? Because we have not normalized this thing. We go back to what we're used to and what our schedule is and all of those things. And so we lose steam real quick because we're not committed, and we become so used to gratification. Oh, I miss watching this, right? That was my Sunday afternoon. If we're talking about football, that was my Sunday afternoon ritual. And, what do I do with this time? It's been a whole month, right? Whereas really, when we talk about a cause, it takes years to make changes. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I have to admit, I kind of almost even forgot all about Sha'Carri up until I heard about this figure
Russian
skater.
ice skater.
Yeah. That's right. I'm going to get my words together. But also, I wonder if anyone would still have remembered her. How had these Summer Olympics happened when they were supposed to happen? If there had been a 2-year gap, just because of COVID, they still had the 2020 Olympics 2020 stuff out there when they were doing. But now it's just a few months later, and it's still halfway fresh on people's mind, which I guess is a positive question mark. So we mentioned, going back to the figure skater, that everyone seems to be running to her rescue now that she fell. I'm just going to say that.
She did. She hit the ice.
She hit the ice, and everyone feels bad for her, even though, who knows, maybe she's having withdrawals, because clearly she's doping. But Dr. Player, do you think, or has it been your experience, that people are a lot more empathic when it comes to young, less melanated women?
Yes. The short answer to that is yes. We live in a society where people of color, African Americans, have been villainized since beginning of time, to the point where when incidents like this occur, once again, this is, how do I put this? We're looked down upon, or this fulfills a self-prophecy for us. In other words, this is how society views us in this manner. Whereas this white girl does it, and all of a sudden, she don't do that. They don't do that. Therefore, this is a one-off thing. And as a result, we're going to treat this as such. So we have a society that tends to run to white women when something happens, whereas everybody else is intended to be strong. So I'm not surprised that this happened, and this is the unfortunate part that we're at as a society, which is when do we start acknowledging that there is this unfair playing field, and that we do take an action to correct that.
And the thing is, it's not just, in the United States. We talk about racism in the United States all the time, but this is something on the international level. Like, even as nationalistic as a lot
Are you
of,
surprised?
I want to be. I can't be though. We're like, oh, USA, and make America great again, and then we're still we're still going for the Russian girl. Because I mean, she might not be American, but she's white. So that, you know what, that's a show for another day. So my argument is that this type of racism, especially in sports, goes all the way from grade school up through the international level. And Dr. Player, I know that if I remember correctly, you've worked with some young athletes in the Twin Cities area, right? Am I
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So tell me, what are some of the things that you've heard them say that they've experienced as even just young Black athletes?
That's a very good question. One of the schools I worked in, one of the issues that was very vocalized, which was, and this is the unfortunate part, a lot of students talked about how when they leave practice at night, that they have to walk together, because there have been numerous times where they've been stopped just because they just been in the area and fit a description.
Walking while black?
Pretty much, yes. And these are just student athletes. They're getting an education. They're performing at a school at a high level, and they're leaving school on. And I say this in the sense that they're leaving school from practice, headed to go home to do homework, to wake up early in the morning to go back to school. So when hearing them talk about that, you almost get them. It's their level of resiliency is astonishing, because not once did any of them say, well, I should stop playing basketball to avoid this. They're like, no, this is unfair. This needs to be addressed in the community. And there's no need for me to have to cope with this scenario of how I'm being mistreated, because something needs to be done with the system here, as opposed to doing something with myself. So that has been vocalized quite frequently by a lot of the students, that, hearing that, it supports the idea of us being a therapist, which is being an advocate for the people we work with, so that this dilemma or issue stops at a young age.
So it sounds like what you're talking about. Many times athletes, they like the sporting world because there's a somewhat perceived level playing field. Where if I perform, I work hard enough, I practice enough, and I sharpen my physical skills, then I'm going to be acknowledged. I'm going to be chosen for the team. I'm going to get a college scholarship, and I'm going to go pro as long as I work hard, because I know they want to win. But also, what I'm hearing, Zahara, is that they cannot escape the racism and the racial bias. What does that do to a 13 or 16-year-old who's trying to make it to go to college on scholarship, because the Black kids understand the realities that are out there, and to go pro so that they can live the lifestyle that they want to? What does they do to the psyche of a teenager?
Wow. So I used to, before I started working with adults, I spent the first part of my career working with adolescents. And so they already deal with the hormonal changes and challenges. And now we're talking about these internal conflicts of, I'm passionate about this, I want this, but, right, there's always that but. What if I don't perform? What if I don't make it? And all of these pressures to be the first, whether it's for their family or to make it financially and be able to provide. Like, there are so many internal conflicts that I think they start to experience. And then we see that for those that do make it and how they struggle, right? We see that they've had so much pressure that some of the decisions that they make is about not what's logical, right? But more about what's going to get me to this perceived success. And so they miss out on some of the fundamental lessons about kind of taking their time, about being in tune with themselves, right? Even with their bodies, because we know athletes will go and go. And so I treat chronic pain, and people will go and go and go without regard to what's happening to them physically. And now, so we not only have the internal struggle that you're having with I need a rest, but we're not listening to our bodies. And what does that do for people long term? And just dealing with the fear of that. So it's just so much kind of like boiling under the surface, and they're still trying to go out there and show out and win the game, win the tournament, whatever it is. And I think that just takes a significant toll on how they perceive themselves, their relationships with other people. Who that is another show for sure. How they show up. And that's hard for people. They become depressed. They seek other ways of coping. They might feel like they can't talk about it because who understands? And if I do share what I'm dealing with, am I going to, be put out of the sport? Are people going to see me as weak?
Right.
I mean, it's just so many questions. And because they haven't, if no one has sat down and talked to them about these things, because we haven't normalized mental health, then they suffer in silence. So very heavy burden for 13 and up in this realm.
Yeah, and I saw that Geneva Gray posted performance-based self-hazing. I think, yeah, that's what I would call it too. Now, and another thing I think about is imagine how much they have to go through to get up to the pro level, to get up to the international level. I'm just thinking about even my child. I won't name any names, but I will say my child on her volleyball team, there were girls who had been put off because they're put off of the team because their parents vocalized issues with bias and racism, and the coach making sure that both of her daughters were always on varsity and always starting. And I had to actually run numbers in SPSS looking through, yeah, because I got systems looking through every yearbook to show that 25% of children of color were cut from the teams as they increased the level. That at the freshman team was about 75% children of color, and that includes Asians, Hispanics, everything. By the time we got to JV, they were down to 40%. And by the time we got to the varsity team, there were 15 girls on the team, 3 of them were black and 2 were Asian. And this one, and then I had to take pictures of starting lineup being 6 white girls and all the children of color sitting on the side before the county would do something. Now they have to replace the whole coaching staff. But I mean, even me standing up for not just my child, but all of the players on that team. My child didn't get to play with the team that year. And I told her before we went in, look, they're probably not going to put you on there. They're mad at me, and that's fine. Just know it'll be a whole new, like I said then, it'll be a whole new coaching staff next year.
Most likely, but you pointed out some facts.
Mm-hmm.
You went and ran the numbers. You discovered the numbers, ran the numbers, and presented them with facts. What I'm curious about, did they dispute the facts and say that it really wasn't accurate, or were they going to hold on to those perceptions that they had?
Check this out. Not only did they dispute the facts, but there was one, it's there one lone token coach who not in front of the other coaches would talk about how racist they were and cry to other coaches. But then when she got there and she was with them, she was like, no, that's not what's happening. We just chose the best place. She sat there, tap danced, and was right along with them in front of them.
So, Dr. Player, I want to ask you a question. As I heard that you've worked with some adolescents and possibly some athletes, within that particular crowd. And I'm reminded about an incident a few years ago when the radio show host Don Imus talked about watching a girls' basketball game, college women's basketball, and he called the black female players nappy-headed hoes. And
I do remember that.
He verbalized that, and I remember thinking how insensitive and hurtful that was. And I'm pretty sure some of the other kids you've worked with, they have maybe heard similar type of insults, or people have treated them differently. How do you cope them to deal with those type of external insults or double standards that are out there and still be professional and try to perform?
So, from my experience working with students who are athletes, it's really talking about two things. One, the unfairness of what's going on, that these individuals are saying things that are not sports related. I get the
Yeah.
idea of trash talking that occurs in any sport, but there's also a line that you don't cross when playing a sport, which is discussing matters of race or sexism towards an individual or the sexual orientation. At that point, now becomes a personal attack on the individual. And we have seen this not only in the incident you described, but also in other sports as well, where players have used derogatory terms to try to get underneath other players' skin. And really talking with the individual or the athlete, really get them to understand the two meanings of it, which is, yeah, they're trying to get underneath your skin, but what do we need to do about this at this point? Which is, how do we process something that's going on in the sport during the time period, but also occurring outside the sport? And how do we get this individual to understand that these things are not right, and that we really need to address the systematic racism of what's being discussed in front of you and about you? So, from my experience working with kids, is really processing that event and seeing where that issue has come from within themselves, or what things has evoked within them, but also getting a focus on the sport itself, which is, how do we get you to focus on what you're doing as an athlete and address this element on and off the court?
Yeah. And Zahara, it sounds like in order to be an athlete, particularly a black athlete, you got to have some tough skin, as you talked about locker room talk, Dr. Player. But now it sounds like they're going to get some extra darts thrown at them or treated quite differently. Is that something we should be preparing our young black athletes for? How to deal with the racism? And even LeBron James had to go through some of this. How do we help them to deal with that, and should we prepare them for it?
So it's two-part, right? Because if we often talk about this like idealistic world, right? That everybody's equal and you don't have, know who you are. And the reality is that that's not how our society works, right? And so as much as we like to have this idealistic and optimistic view about life and not have to want to have those difficult conversations, I think they're essential. I think they're essential, that we have to say that there are differences, that everybody doesn't appreciate your beautiful black skin, right? Or your certain features that you have, but that doesn't define who they think you are, doesn't define who you are. So let's talk about who you are and what you know to be true. And that is not hinged on what someone else says because they're in their feelings or they're having insecurities or they want to intimidate you to throw you off your game, and really understand where that comes from. That it's not about you, right? It's not about who you are and how you look. It's about their own stuff that they're attempting to project on you. And so, unfortunately, I think that we absolutely need to have these conversations with our young Black athletes because it is our reality until something changes.
Yeah, I remember an incident in my old an employer I worked at years ago at a basketball game and college, and the team, um, my university, the team has the black players on it, and they played a school that had all white players, and some of the white players were doing monkey uh, movements
Mm.
when the black players from my old university from years ago uh, went up to the free throw line. And I remember I wasn't at the game, but everyone was talking about it, and how upset people were that people allowed it to continue, including the refs,
Mhm.
to continue throughout the game with that. But now I'm even thinking more about those athletes and how, what you mentioned earlier, Dr. Player, no one ran to their
Mm.
defense. No
Mhm.
one was concerned about their feelings when they're just up there playing a game they love and they have a college scholarship. Here are some people who want to insult them with some racial gestures that are out there. So it certainly seems like black athletes from an early age have to develop that thick skin and be better prepared to deal with some of those realities more so than the white athletes that are out there. Not only from the fans, but from their own organization,
Right.
not coming to their defense and not helping them. Remember the woman who was running for U.S. Senate and she was the president of the Atlanta Dream basketball team.
Kelly Loeffler.
Thank you. The one who look. Oh, let me stop. Let me stop.
If
Let
I
me
can't
stop.
do it, you can't do it.
She couldn't support her own players,
Right.
with Black Lives Matters, when the majority, overwhelming majority of her players were African Americans. She could not support them, so it seems like our Black athletes are going through a hell of a lot. And I hope that there's some type of avenues created to give them the support that they need. So as we begin to close out, Dr. Player and Zahara, what type of advice can you give to the Black athletes, and what type of resources should we make available to them?
Zahara, you can go first if you like.
Oh, okay, sure. So flip a coin over here. So I think that advice is so much, right? I think that it's important to understand yourself. I think it's important to have a good, healthy support system around you. I think it's also important to listen to your body, and not allow other people's expectations of you to push you past what you're comfortable with, what your body allows you to do, because that could be detrimental in the long term. I think it's important to advocate or learn how to advocate for yourself and negotiate, so that you're not compromising your values and your belief systems for the game, because, if something happens to you, they're going to replace you, right? I know we talk about that with work, but they will replace you real quick. And
Immediately.
Right. And you sacrifice so much of yourself. You've given so much of yourself to this game that you love so much. And it's not that you shouldn't, but you also need to understand your value and where you are realistically within this space. So those would be some recommendations that I have. In terms of resources, I think there are quite a few, from clinicians of color to therapy for Black men to therapy for Black girls. There is NAMI, the National Association of Mental Illness, if you just want to learn more and find out about what resources are available. But definitely, if you need help, seek it out. Don't prolong it. Don't feel like you have to go through this alone, because there's absolutely no reason for you to suffer in silence.
Thank you.
And I'm inclined to agree. I would say, as far as resources, you always have Psychology Today. You have a plethora of therapists out there that you can, research, look up, see what you have, you feel comfortable with. I strongly encourage mental health. I feel like, we shouldn't wait until we're in the ninth inning to say, I want to get help. Help is out there, whether you just need to brainstorm or figure out what's going on within in order to make yourself a stronger person at the end of the day. As far as advice, one of the things that stick out to me that my dad shared with me when at a young age, which is no one's able to define you, only you. And I think that's very important, that we not allow society or people outside of us to define who we are by whether that's making racial comments or judging us off a limited time of knowing us on our character. Only you know who you are. So really engaging in self-care, identifying a toolbox or things you can do for self-care is important so that you can have your routine check-ins. But remember, 5 positive things about yourself and continue to tell yourself those things, because no one can take that away from you.
Absolutely. Dr. Dickerson, anything you want to add to it?
No, because I'll start going on a tangent. I want to throw something out there, not just for the athletes, but I'll say for the coaches and the family members who are not the Black players. And it's just this simple. Stop being racist. Check your privilege. And if someone tells you that you are racist, don't be offended. Try to figure out what you did to make them say that about you.
Do some self-reflection.
Mm-hmm.
That may be hard for some folk out there.
I know it is.
You know it is. But thank you guys for coming out, talking about this subject. I've learned a lot today about athletes. I've never been an athlete. So I was the one to go to school.
I played the piano.
I went to school. But I didn't know it was so tough on our Black athletes, and particularly the young ones, having to go to college and everything and have this extra added pressure. put on them. So thank you for coming on board. So now I just want you guys to let the audience know, how can they contact you in case anyone wants to continue this discussion with you, or they want to reach out to you for you to continue talking about this in another platform. Dr. Player, let's start with you. How can people reach you?
They can reach me through my Gmail account, which is aplayer. That's A as in with my initial Antoine. Player, P as in Peter, LAYER .therapist@gmail.com.
So aplayer.therapist@gmail.com.
Yes, ma'am.
What about you, Sahara? How can people
Okay.
find you?
Sure. So if someone would like for me to do any speaking engagements or consulting, they can go to Zahara Rain. That's my first name, ZaharaRayne.com. If you're looking for therapy in Texas or Michigan, they can go to Ivory Park, IVORYPARKPLLC.com. And then, of course, I'm on Instagram, newly on Instagram at Zahara Rain. And those are places you can reach me.
All right. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for visiting us tonight and speaking with us and giving our listeners so much information. We do appreciate having you.
Absolutely. And for the rest of the audience out there, you can find us at our website, twotherapist.com. That's TWO therapist with an S. .com, and we are broadcasting live every Thursday evening at 7:30 p.m. We're going to have a new feature on the show, hopefully next week, where the audience, you can actually ask us questions about you, your situation, your ordeal. Just go to twotherapist.com and click on the link, Ask the Therapist, and give us the background information. And Dr. Aisha and I are going to talk about the situation, possibly have a guest on the show so that we can provide you with some adequate guidance from some experts. So look out for that. You can also contact us through the email that's also available on the website, twotherapist.com. All right. Anyone else want to say anything in these closing minutes?
Nope, that's it.
All right, guys. So thank you for
Good
joining
night.
us. We're going to
Thank you.
Like this.